Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother and sister, welcome back to Islamic Notes channel. In the past 2 decades, China has experienced a complex and colorful religious dynamic. Despite the central government's emphasis on secularism and tight control over religious practices, spirituality among the people, especially in mountainous areas and minority regions, has continued to develop in unexpected ways. One of the most interesting trends is the increasing search for meaning in life that crosses conventional religious boundaries. It is in this context that a rare phenomenon has emerged. Dozens of monks from an ancient temple in Yunnan Province have decided to abandon their Buddhist beliefs and embrace Islam. This is not just a simple conversion process, but rather a reflection of a profound spiritual quest that involves history, meditation, and an openness to religious narratives that were previously foreign to them. According to the oral and written documentation that has been collected, a major turning point in the monks' spiritual journey occurred when they made a transcontinental pilgrimage and visited a site believed to be the tomb of the Prophet Zulkifli, a prophet in Islamic tradition who is described in the Quran as patient, just, and not easily angered. Prophet Zulkifli is not a figure who is often discussed in daily preaching or general Islamic studies, let alone widely known in the non-Muslim world. However, his simple yet exemplary life story has extraordinary resonance for monks who have for years lived the principles of inner silence, self-control, and sincerity of intention in carrying out religious practices. The story of Prophet Zulkifli touches the core of these values, and from here a major transformation begins. This article is not here to raise the narrative of conversion as a form of inter-religious competition, but as material for interfaith reflection on how goodness and exemplary behavior from universal spiritual figures can unite human hearts above differences in doctrine. In this case, the example of Prophet Zulkifli became a bridge of new understanding for a group of Buddhists who then found the light of Islam in a very personal form. This phenomenon was first detected by several field researchers in 2021, when an independent journal writer from Central Asia found an unusual change in a mountain village in Yunnan. A Buddhist temple that was previously busy with rituals and meditation suddenly became quiet and did not function as usual. Upon further investigation, it was discovered that most of its monks had traveled to West Asia. Soon after, they announced secretly that they had become Muslims. Some of them exchanged their orange robes for plain white clothes, forming a small community they called the Zulkifli brothers, a name that reflected their admiration for the Prophet who had touched their hearts. Especially in terms of morality and inner discipline, values such as patience, honesty, self-control, and compassion for all living beings are values they have held since they became monks, and they now rediscover them in Islamic teachings, but with a more personal divine dimension. Gradually, these former monks began to build bridges of understanding between the two great traditions, Buddhism and Islam. They no longer saw their conversion as a complete break with the past, but as a continuation of the same spiritual journey, only in a more complete form. Some of them even began to compose short treatises in Mandarin explaining the intersection of values between Buddhism and Islam, especially for those who were experiencing spiritual confusion. One of the writings that became popular among their small circle was entitled From Silence to Prostration, in which the author, a former monk named Yusuf Lin, describes a shift from sitting still in meditation to bowing and prostrating in prayer as a shift from silent awareness to communicative awareness, where the relationship between humans and God is no longer one way, but a living dialogue. This small community, who call themselves the Ikhwan Zulkifli, now live in a kind of spiritual fringe. They do not claim to be religious leaders, nor do they have the ambition to form a large movement. They only want to live in peace and sincerity as they used to live as monks, but now in the light of Islam. One of the principles they hold firmly is not to denigrate the religion they left behind. In every discussion and meeting, they always emphasize that what they are experiencing is a personal search, not a form of rejection of Buddhism, but rather the fulfillment of a longing for a personal and living God. Although they live in limitations and sometimes have to move to avoid social pressure or government supervision, They continue to hold on to the principles of patience and trust. They believe that the truth does not always have to be conveyed through the pulpit, but can be shown through morals and lifestyle. This phenomenon remains a mystery as well as a source of reflection for many religious researchers and sociologists in East Asia. Why did a group of monks who had reached a high spiritual level in Buddhism find the deepest meaning in Islam? Why could a name that is rarely mentioned, like the Prophet Zulkifli, be the gateway to such a profound transformation? Perhaps the answer is not in the grand narrative, but in the most honest voice of the heart, which cannot be silenced by doctrine or system. The voice that has been silent in the silence of meditation now finds its answer in the whisper of the Quran. By remembering Allah, hearts become calm. Kinasarad 28. But their journey was not always smooth. The decision of the former monks to convert to Islam caused minor unrest in some of the Buddhist temples and communities where they used to live. Some of their old colleagues considered them traitors, some even accusing them of being brainwashed by outside forces. Many of them had to face ostracization, even the threat of being reported to the authorities for allegedly spreading the religion illegally, something that is very sensitive in China's religious control system. Yusuf Lin, for example, was detained for 3 weeks by local authorities after a former fellow monk reported him for spreading foreign teachings. But during questioning, Yusuf never forced anything. "I only told what I felt," he told the officers. "If my heart now bows down in prostration, is that a crime?" After being released, Yusuf and 2 of his colleagues chose to move to a small village in Yunnan Province that had a Hui Muslim community. There they were welcomed calmly. The Hui community, accustomed to living side by side with other majority and minority groups, welcomed them as fellow believers. Although at first there were misunderstandings due to differences in cultural background and the way they expressed their Islam, over time a sense of mutual trust grew. In a small brown brick mosque on the edge of the village, Yusuf Lin now teaches children Arabic and the basics of Islamic jurisprudence. He also teaches some elderly residents breathing and concentration techniques that he has learned from his Buddhist meditation experience. Islam does not forbid contemplation techniques as long as they do not deviate from the principle of monotheism. He says, "We can learn to be calm from the breath, but remembering God is above all else." Slowly, the small circle of the Zulkifli brothers grew. They did not actively preach outside, but their presence began to inspire. Young monks who were beginning to question their spiritual direction came quietly to discuss. They spoke carefully, often using sign language or metaphors. They were afraid but also hungry for the truth. One of them, now known as Ahmad Shu, wrote in his personal journal, "For years I have sought solitude, rejected the world and pursued nirvana. But in that silence I heard a voice I had never recognized before. A calling voice, not from within me, but from something higher. And when I read the first verse of Al-Fatiha, my heart sank. For the first time I felt known by God, not just understanding his concepts." Now this phenomenon is starting to get attention from academics abroad. Several researchers from Turkey and Malaysia have come to conduct interviews and documentation, albeit with great caution. They see this as not just a case of conversion, but a sign of something deeper, a spiritual restlessness seeking a new direction amidst China's increasingly secular and materialistic modern world. During one of the joint Dhikr sessions they held in secret, an old former monk now called Haji Wei closed his eyes and whispered softly, "We are not ordinary converts. We are seekers, and we have found it in Islam, not as a foreign religion, but as the home we have been looking for." Authorities did not take long to respond. Although not overtly, religious affairs and internal security departments began to keep track of the movements of these former monks. They monitored small mosques in Gansu and Ningxia, checked CCTV footage, and assigned local informants to report suspicious activity. Especially if former Sangha, monastic community members, began to engage in Islamic activities. A local official, whose identity was withheld in the leaked documents, called the phenomenon an ideological anomaly that needed to be controlled before it spread. He wrote, "Spiritual conversion from Buddhism to Islam, especially by religious figures who were once respected in the Buddhist community, has the potential to create new identity nodes that are inconsistent with the Chinese model of social harmony. Official policy, however, remained cautious. The central government was reluctant to stir up international sentiment, especially after several short videos of Yusuf Lin and Haji Wei circulated on overseas social media with touching English and Arabic translations. One video shows Yusuf Lin crying while reciting Surah Al-Ikhlas, with the caption, "I used to seek peace, but I didn't know that peace is not absence, but presence, the presence of Allah." The video went viral, garnering attention from Muslim channels in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and even among the Uyghur diaspora. Many see the converts as a symbol of hope amid China's tight controls on religion. Authorities tried to block the video from spreading, but its trail had already spread. In fact, in a Friday sermon in Istanbul, an imam referred to Yusuf Lin as "our brother in the East who crossed the desert to find the light of monotheism." Amid the pressure, the Yunnan Zulkifli group maintained their calm rhythm of life. They strengthened their internal networks, setting disciplined but flexible schedules for studying, working, and praying. Some of them began writing short treatises, spiritual notes, personal interpretations of their life journeys, which were distributed in limited quantities through secure networks. But they knew that a storm could come at any time. One night, Yusuf Lin had a dream. He saw himself standing in front of hundreds of people in gray clothes, their faces unclear, but their eyes full of questions. Behind them, there was a huge pagoda-like building that was slowly collapsing. From the ruins, the call to prayer emerged. When he woke up, Yusuf sat for a long time in silence. Beside him, Haji Wei read the Quran slowly. Yusuf looked at him and said, "Maybe this is just the beginning. Maybe God is preparing something bigger than we can imagine." Haji Wei smiled. "And if that is true, then our job is not to resist, but to prepare." A few months later, the ex-monk convert movement began to spread to the major cities, not through open proselytizing, but through small gatherings that were barely distinguishable from cultural discussions or Eastern philosophy study groups. In Chengdu, a former graduate student of Mahayana Buddhism named Liang An became a prominent figure. He had joined shortly after reading Haji Wei's writings circulating in untitled PDF form, with only the delicate calligraphy on the cover. The Journey from Sunya to Shahada. Liang An held discussion classes in his small apartment, disguising the theme as comparative Middle Eastern spirituality. But in each session, he slowly introduced the concept of monotheism and contrasted it with the emptiness he had studied. Emptiness empties everything. But what if what we find in that emptiness is the absolute being, he said at one meeting. The participants fell silent. Some began to bow their heads. One named Tian Ru, a former junior monk from Wudang, came to tears. He had been restless for a long time, especially after seeing how the old community only talked about enlightenment as an abstraction, while his heart still felt lonely and alien. Meanwhile, pressure from the authorities began to increase. Mosques in Ningxia that had once been safe havens for ex-monks began to be inspected more frequently. Some members of the community began to feel restless, especially young people who had recently converted to Islam and did not yet have a solid understanding. One of them was Zhang Wei, a former volunteer at the temple, only 22 years old. Zhang Wei still had nightmares. He grew up in a strong Han nationalist family, and his father was a former soldier. When he said the Shahada, he did not dare to tell anyone at home. He kept a small mushaf under his mattress and memorized short chapters in the bathroom, because that was the only place he could lock the door. One night he came to Yusuf Lin in secret. His face was pale. He was shaking. "Ustads, I'm scared. I feel like I'm nothing. I'm not even sure if I can live like this. Why did Allah choose me?" Yusuf stared at him silently, then took his hand and placed it on Zhang Wei's chest. "Because you have lost everything, you are capable of having something greater. You are nothing, so that you know that the only one worthy of worship is Him." Zhang cried loudly that night, and when dawn broke, he stood in the prayer row, wearing the shabby gray robe he used to wear as a temple servant. But this time, he wore it to prostrate himself to the one God. This phenomenon not only touched the domestic Muslim community, but began to attract the attention of foreign academics and alternative media. They called it the Gansu Awakening. But for the actors in it, this was not a social awakening. This was a return home. A return from philosophical silence to the sentence that burned the soul. La ilaha illallah. That fall, for the first time, the community of ex-monk converts held a nationwide secret meeting. Set in an old house on the outskirts of Lanzhou that once belonged to an antiques collector, minor leaders from various cities, Liang An from Chengdu, Tian Ru from Chongqing, Zhang Wei from Xi'an, and several young figures from Dunhuang to Beijing, gathered under the dim light of hanging lanterns. Yusuf Lin sat in the middle of the room, wearing an old wool coat in a white imama that was starting to fade. His eyes looked at the young audience around him one by one. We are not a party. We are not an organization. We are not a new group. We are just travelers who have seen the light. But that light is now starting to be blocked. He paused for a moment, then held up a piece of paper on which was written a verse. And whoever Allah wills to be guided, surely He will expand his chest to accept Islam. Al-An'am 125. Don't think the test hasn't arrived yet. The government will start investigating who among us has influence. And the biggest enemy is not the authorities, but the doubts in our own hearts. Silence thickened. Then the door was knocked 3 times according to the agreed code. A young man entered, bringing news that changed the atmosphere. Foreign media have begun investigating. There was a video of our small meeting in Chengdu that was leaked. And someone from our old temple is working with the police. Suddenly, the meeting room became anxious. Several people began discussing how to protect data, disguise identities, and some even suggested a temporary disbandment. But Yusuf Lin spoke up again. Don't get caught up in strategy. This is not a political fight. This is an inner struggle. Remember, the Ashabul Kahfi do not fight with weapons. They only seek refuge in caves and surrender to God. Not long after, the first wave of arrests occurred. Not mass, but quiet. Several converts disappeared without a trace. Others were pressured to openly deny their Islam. Some eventually gave in, returned to the temple, and stated that they were lost in mystical madness. But there are those who remain silent, even when their families, jobs, and homes have disappeared overnight. In the small village of Ganan, an elderly ex-monk named Master Wu, now called Abdul Haq, sits in the snow, teaching 2 young men to perform ablution with water he has hoarded from the mountains. He knows his time is short, but he smiles. I have seen the world and all that is in it, but nothing is more beautiful than the sound of the call to prayer from a heart that was once empty. As the underground movement continues to grow in secret, its first schism emerges. A group of young people who feel that Islam must be upheld openly, even if it means a full frontal clash with the state. They call themselves An-Nur and begin printing hard-hitting pamphlets on Sharia and the Caliphate. Liang An, who had been a peacemaker, rebuked them in a long letter. Let us not repeat the mistakes of the past, fighting shadows with shadows and spreading light with swords. We are not mujahids on the battlefield. We are night watchmen, whispering guidance into the ears of the sleeping. But some of them refused. Internal conflict began to grow. The cold winter bites to the bone. In a rented house in the small town of Baotu, 2 young men from the An-Nur group are discussing their grand plan. Zhao Ming, who now calls himself Abu Amir, speaks with fiery passion, emphasizing words with his index finger on the table. How long are we going to hide like cowards? This is not the time to hide. The Prophet built civilization from the underground of Medina, and we can start from here. But his colleague Majun, Abdullah, looks doubtful. He stares at the pages of pamphlets in Mandarin containing calls for Sharia and rejection of secular tyrants. Abu Amir, are you really sure this is the path that is approved? Yusuf Lin said, our struggle is not to create clashes, but to keep the light of guidance burning, slowly but surely. Yusuf Lin is just an old Sufi who is afraid of change. Abu Amir interrupts loudly. If we keep waiting, all that will be left are ruins of faith and arrests. We need to declare our existence. Now. Within days, the pamphlets began circulating in the alleys of small college campuses in Xi'an, Lanzhou, and Taiyuan. The authorities soon moved quickly. Within weeks, 10 Anur members were arrested, including Abu Amir. In the interrogation room, he gave only one answer when asked why he had betrayed traditional Chinese values. "I did not betray, I just came home." In the meantime, Yusuf Lin, who already knew the wind was changing, decided to do something he had never imagined: send a letter to the international Muslim community. He wrote in Arabic, using an automatic translation that he then corrected himself, to the great scholars of Al-Azhar, Mecca, and Istanbul. "Dear brothers and sisters, we are not here seeking political support. We are not asking for supplies or asylum. We only want you to know that Islam has grown in places you never expected, in the hearts of incense keepers, mandala painters, and the inheritors of Laozi's teachings. We don't want your jihad. We only want your prayers." The letter was smuggled through a Malaysian journalist covering minority culture in Gansu. A few weeks later, the echo of the letter reached a prominent cleric in Istanbul, who secretly read part of it during his Friday sermon. In the Far East, from behind the shadow of the Great Wall, there are sprouts of Islam growing in the cracks of the inner ruins. They are not politicians, they are not soldiers. They are simply seekers of meaning, who find God in the quietest place. But as with all underground movements, pressure slowly increased. Authorities began using facial recognition technology, tracking transactions, and even infiltrating convert communities. Some temples that had been the initial places of guidance were now under tight security. Ex-monks were forced to sign a statement that they were drunk with a foreign religion. In such conditions, Yusuf Lin decided on a final step: to form the Silent Assembly, a community of Islamic remembrance and learning that was completely invisible, undocumented, and had no formal structure. Each meeting was attended by only 3 to 5 people, moved from place to place, kept no names, and published nothing. Like bamboo roots, he told his students, invisible but connected. When spring comes, they will break through to the surface, all at once. The following spring, the unexpected happened. A high-ranking local official, known for his harshness toward foreign religions, was found mysteriously dead in his home. In his hand was a small Chinese manuscript. The news did not spread widely, but to the underground community, it was a sign that guidance had penetrated the heart of power. Spring brought more than just news of the high official's death. It also brought rumors. Among the authorities, whispers began to circulate. Some said the official had secretly converted to Islam after meeting a white-bearded old man from the Qinghai region. Others said he was inspired by reading a translation of the Al-Fatiha he found in an old Buddhist library. Whatever the truth, the effects were real. Some religious community watchdogs were suddenly transferred. Raid operations on underground mosques began to loosen, and in one small county in Sichuan Province, a village chief secretly allowed his people to convert their homes into ablution facilities. Abroad, the phenomenon began to attract the attention of the Muslim world. An anonymous article titled "The Bamboo Reverts" appeared in a Middle East academic journal, analyzing the phenomenon of ex-monk conversions and spiritual searches in post-materialist China. Reactions were mixed. Some saw it as a sign of a global Islamic revival from the most unlikely of places. Others suspected it was propaganda or intelligence manipulation. But among the great scholars, Yusuf Lin's name began to be mentioned as Al-Hakim Ash-Shamit, the silent sage. Several young Egyptian and Turkish scholars began to study his old works that had been secretly translated by the Chinese Muslim diaspora community in Malaysia. Meanwhile, the Silent Assembly grew, not in numbers, but in depth. They did not discuss geopolitics, classical fiqh, or manhaj. They simply memorized the names of Allah, understood short verses, and strengthened their faith in silence. They learned that endurance was a form of dawah, that silence in their context was not cowardice, but a fortress. Yusuf Lin began to prepare his students for the next generation. He knew his life would not be long. In one of his secret underground halakas in Xi'an, he said, "Don't wait for the world to notice us. Don't wait for legitimacy. Don't wait for justice from outside. Light doesn't need a stage. It only needs darkness to shine." A few years later, an intelligence report was leaked. Its contents shocked central officials. An estimated 60,000 plus Chinese, mostly Buddhist and atheist, had secretly converted to Islam. No one could be sure. But one thing was clear: Islam in China had gone from a statistical minority to a silent movement, deep-rooted and undetected by the radar of ordinary powers.